In the year 1843, nearly a century before the first electronic computer would be built, a young woman in Victorian England wrote what is now recognized as the world's first computer program, an algorithm designed to calculate Bernoulli numbers on a machine that existed only in blueprints and would never be constructed in her lifetime, yet her visionary notes described concepts that would become fundamental to modern computing: loops, subroutines, and the revolutionary idea that machines could manipulate symbols representing anything, not just numbers. Her work was dismissed, forgotten, and attributed to men for over a century, her contributions erased by a society that could not conceive of a woman possessing such mathematical and visionary genius. This is the extraordinary story of Ada Lovelace, daughter of the poet Lord Byron, who saw the potential of computing machines 100 years before the digital age began, wrote the first algorithm intended for machine execution, and articulated a philosophy of artificial intelligence that remains relevant in the age of ChatGPT and neural networks. Born Augusta Ada Byron on December 10, 1815, her life began in scandal and ended in obscurity, yet the brief 36 years between contained intellectual achievements that would reshape human civilization generations after her death. Her father, Lord Byron, was the most famous and notorious poet of the Romantic era, whose wild lifestyle, scandalous affairs, and eventual exile from England became legendary. Her mother, Lady Anne Isabella Milbank Byron, was a mathematically gifted woman who had been courted for her intellect as much as her fortune, nicknamed the Princess of Parallelograms by Byron himself. The marriage was disastrous, collapsing within weeks of Ada's birth, and Byron left England forever when Ada was only 1 month old, dying in Greece when she was 8, having never seen his daughter again. Lady Byron, determined that Ada would not inherit her father's poetic temperament and what she viewed as moral madness, subjected her daughter to a rigorous education focused intensely on mathematics and logic, disciplines considered highly unusual for girls of any social class in early 19th century England. Ada showed exceptional mathematical aptitude from childhood, but she also inherited her father's imagination and romantic sensibility, creating what she would later call poetical science, a fusion of analytical rigor and creative vision that would define her unique contribution to computing theory. Throughout her childhood, Ada suffered from various illnesses, including a bout of measles at age 7 that left her temporarily paralyzed and requiring crutches for years, yet she used this forced immobility to deepen her studies and develop her intellectual abilities. As she matured, Ada's mathematical education intensified through correspondence with some of the leading scientific minds of Victorian England. Her mother arranged for her to study with Mary Somerville, one of the rare women who had achieved recognition in mathematics and astronomy, and through Somerville, Ada was introduced to the intellectual circles that would change her life. At age 17, attending a party at Somerville's home, Ada met Charles Babbage, a mathematician and inventor who would become her mentor, collaborator, and the person who would recognize and encourage her extraordinary gifts. Babbage had designed what he called the difference engine, a mechanical calculator intended to compute and print mathematical tables automatically, eliminating the human errors that plagued navigation and engineering calculations. More significantly, he was developing plans for a far more ambitious machine called the Analytical Engine, a general-purpose mechanical computer that could be programmed to perform any calculation through the use of punched cards similar to those used in jacquard looms to create complex woven patterns. When Babbage demonstrated a small working section of the difference engine to Ada, she immediately grasped not just how it worked but the profound implications of mechanical calculation, declaring in her notes that she could see something in the machine that exceeded its immediate function. In 1835, at age 19, Ada married William King, who would become the Earl of Lovelace 3 years later, making her the Countess of Lovelace, by which she is commonly known today. The marriage produced 3 children, and Victorian society expected Ada to devote herself entirely to domestic duties, yet she continued her mathematical studies whenever possible, corresponding with Babbage and other mathematicians, developing her understanding of the theoretical foundations of computation. Her domestic responsibilities and frequent illnesses limited her time for intellectual work, creating frustration that permeates her letters where she expresses desperate hunger for mathematical problems to solve and discoveries to make. The opportunity that would secure her place in history came in 1842 when Babbage asked her to translate a French memoir about the analytical engine written by Italian engineer Luigi Menabrea. Ada not only translated the article but added her own extensive notes that were nearly 3 times longer than the original text, notes that transformed a technical description into a visionary exploration of what computing machines could ultimately achieve. These notes, published in 1843 under the initials AAL to obscure her gender, contained insights so profound that computer scientists today still study them as foundational texts in the philosophy of artificial intelligence and computational theory. If these stories of brilliant minds whose contributions were hidden, dismissed, or attributed to others inspire your curiosity about the forgotten pioneers who shaped our technological world, consider subscribing to Hidden Minds and activating the notification bell to discover more extraordinary individuals whose genius transcended the limitations society imposed upon them. In Note G, the longest and most significant of her annotations, Ada presented what is now recognized as the first computer algorithm, a detailed step-by-step procedure for calculating Bernoulli numbers using the Analytical Engine. She created a diagram showing exactly how the machine would process data through various operations, using notation that anticipated modern flowcharts and programming concepts. The algorithm included loops, conditional branching, and the manipulation of variables, fundamental programming structures that would not be reinvented until the 20th century when electronic computers finally made such operations practical. More remarkably, she included an explicit note about preventing an infinite loop, demonstrating awareness of a bug that would plague programmers for generations. Beyond the technical achievement of writing this algorithm, Ada articulated philosophical insights that were breathtakingly ahead of their time. She wrote that the analytical engine might act upon other things besides number, were objects found whose mutual fundamental relations could be expressed by abstract signs, essentially describing the concept of general-purpose computing where machines manipulate symbols that can represent anything from numbers to words to images to music. This vision of symbolic manipulation rather than mere calculation represented a conceptual leap that most mathematicians of her era could not comprehend. Ada also addressed what would later be called the Lady Lovelace objection to artificial intelligence, stating that the analytical engine has no pretensions whatever to originate anything, that it can do only whatever we know how to order it to perform, a philosophical position about the limitations of mechanical intelligence that remains debated in the age of machine learning and neural networks. Her nuanced understanding that machines could appear creative by recombining existing patterns in novel ways anticipated modern discussions about whether artificial intelligence truly thinks or merely simulates thinking through sophisticated pattern matching. She envisioned the analytical engine composing elaborate pieces of music, producing graphics and solving problems across domains, writing that the engine might compose elaborate and scientific pieces of music of any degree of complexity or extent, a prediction that perfectly describes modern computational art and algorithmic composition. In an era when computers meant human calculators, usually women performing tedious arithmetic, Ada Lovelace imagined machines as creative partners in scientific and artistic endeavors, a vision so radical that it would take over a century for technology to catch up with her imagination. Tragically, neither the difference engine nor the analytical engine were built during Babbage's or Ada's lifetimes. The British government, which had funded early work on the difference engine, withdrew support after years of delays and cost overruns, and Babbage could never secure the substantial funding needed to construct the far more complex analytical engine. The machine existed only as detailed plans and a few small demonstration components, meaning Ada's program was never executed on actual hardware, remaining a theoretical achievement until the computer age finally arrived. Ada spent her later years struggling with deteriorating health, financial problems, and a gambling addiction that she attempted to overcome by developing a mathematical system for betting on horses, a scheme that predictably failed and left her in debt. She continued her mathematical work when health permitted, corresponding with scientists and developing ideas about the relationship between mind and matter, nervous system and thought, that anticipated later discoveries in neuroscience and cognitive science. She maintained her friendship and collaboration with Babbage, though their relationship grew strained at times over questions of credit and recognition for the ideas in her published notes. In 1852, at the age of only 36, Ada Lovelace died of uterine cancer, the same disease and at the same age as her father Lord Byron had died decades earlier. Her final months were agonizing, treated with painful procedures and heavy doses of opium that were the only pain management available in that era. She was buried in the Byron family vault at the Church of St. Mary Magdalene in Hucknall, Nottinghamshire, beside the father she had never known, a poignant ending to a life spent trying to reconcile her inherited romantic sensibility with her cultivated mathematical rationality. For over a century after her death, Ada Lovelace's contributions were largely forgotten or minimized. Some historians attributed her notes to Babbage himself, claiming she had merely transcribed his ideas despite contemporary correspondence proving the insights were her own. Victorian prejudices about women's intellectual capabilities led scholars to assume that any sophisticated mathematical work must have come from the men she knew rather than her own mind. The analytical engine itself remained an obscure footnote in the history of mathematics, an ambitious failure rather than a visionary precursor to the digital age. Recognition finally began in the 1950s when pioneering computer scientist B.V. Bowden republished Ada's notes, drawing attention to their significance as the first published computer program and theoretical exploration of computing possibilities. As computer science matured as a discipline, scholars increasingly recognized that Ada had articulated concepts decades or centuries before they were independently rediscovered, from the idea of general-purpose computing to questions about artificial creativity and machine intelligence. In 1980, the United States Department of Defense named a programming language Ada in her honor, acknowledging her as the first computer programmer. October 15, the date Babbage and Ada first met, has been celebrated as Ada Lovelace Day since 2009, an international celebration of women in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Statues, scholarships, and awards bearing her name have proliferated as her contributions receive long overdue recognition. The question of what might have been had Ada lived longer and had better health haunts anyone who studies her life. She died at 36, the same age Mozart died, leaving us to wonder what additional insights she might have developed, what other algorithms she might have written, how her vision of poetical science might have influenced the development of computing had she lived into the 1880s or 90s when electrical technologies began emerging. Her prescient understanding that machines could manipulate symbols representing anything, not just numbers, essentially described the fundamental principle underlying all modern computing, from word processors to image editors to music production software. Every time you use a computer to create art, write text, edit photos, or compose music, you are realizing the vision Ada Lovelace articulated in 1843 when she wrote that the Analytical Engine weaves algebraic patterns just as the jacquard loom weaves flowers and leaves. The broader significance of Ada Lovelace extends beyond her technical contributions to what her story reveals about hidden genius and systematic exclusion. How many other brilliant women in Victorian England possessed similar mathematical gifts but lacked Ada's social position, educational opportunities, and access to scientific networks? How many potential Ada Lovelaces were denied education entirely, their abilities never discovered or developed because society deemed women incapable of abstract thought? Her life demonstrates that genius can emerge despite obstacles, that visionary insights can occur before the technology exists to implement them, and that the human imagination can conceive possibilities that material reality takes generations to realize. She bridged her father's poetic creativity with her mother's mathematical precision, creating a unique synthesis that allowed her to see what pure mathematicians missed, that computing machines represented not just faster arithmetic but a fundamentally new way of creating, discovering, and understanding. Today, as artificial intelligence reshapes our world, as machines generate art and music and text, as we debate whether computers truly think or merely simulate intelligence, the questions Ada Lovelace posed in 1843 remain urgently relevant. Her insight that machines can only do what we know how to order them to perform frames ongoing discussions about the nature of consciousness and creativity. Her vision of computers as creative partners rather than mere calculators anticipated the collaborative relationship between humans and machines that defines contemporary technology work. The tragedy is not just that Ada Lovelace died young, but that her ideas died with her, buried and forgotten for over a century, forcing later pioneers to independently rediscover insights she had already articulated. The Analytical Engine blueprints gathered dust in archives. Her notes were dismissed as the dabbling of an aristocratic amateur, and the first computer program ever written had to wait 100 years to be recognized as such. Every programmer writing code today, every computer scientist developing algorithms, every person using digital technology to create or communicate stands on foundations that Ada Lovelace helped establish when she saw beyond brass gears and punched cards to envision a future where machines would extend human creativity and intelligence in ways her contemporaries could not imagine. Her story reminds us that progress is not inevitable, that brilliant insights can be lost and must be fought for, and that recognizing genius requires looking beyond superficial characteristics to see the depth of insight and imagination that transforms possibility into reality.